The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive arena, with seats rising in circular tiers around a central platform. Thousands of aliens from hundreds of worlds filled those seats, their forms ranging from crystalline beings that reflected light and rainbow patterns to massive creatures that required special reinforced seating. The air filtration system worked constantly to accommodate the different atmospheric needs of so many species, creating a faint hum that served as background noise to the endless political debates. Ambassador Giwan Park sat in the human delegation section, her hands folded neatly on the smooth surface of her desk. She had been serving as Earth's primary representative for 5 years now, and before her, 3 other ambassadors had held this position. 30 years total of humanity trying to earn respect and recognition from the Galactic Council. 30 years of contributions, compromises, and quiet service to the greater galactic community. The current speaker was Counselor Vex, a tall being from the Altheric Empire with skin that shifted between purple and blue depending on his mood. Right now, it was a deep violet, which Jiwan had learned meant he was feeling particularly superior. He was addressing the assembly about the latest human proposal for fair trade route distribution. The human delegation once again demonstrates their fundamental misunderstanding of galactic economics, Vex said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's advanced acoustics. Their emotional reasoning and primitive attachment to concepts like fairness blind them to the practical realities of interstellar commerce. Laughter rippled through several sections of the assembly. Giwan kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. She had heard variations of this speech dozens of times before. Humans were always too emotional, too primitive, too young as a spacefaring species to truly understand the complexities of galactic civilization. The vote came quickly. The human proposal was rejected with barely any discussion. 247 votes against, 15 votes in favor, 32 abstentions. The 15 supporters were smaller species who had benefited directly from human aid programs. The abstentions were from species who felt mildly sympathetic, but not enough to actually support humanity publicly. G1 stood and requested permission to speak on another matter. The session chair, a floating gaseous being named Horlicks, granted her 2 minutes. She began to explain the situation with human colonies along the Outer Rim, where Kryn pirates had been raiding settlements for months. 3 colonies had been attacked. 217 humans were dead. She had brought evidence, recordings, and a formal request for council intervention. Horlicks cut her microphone after 90 seconds. This matter falls under local security jurisdiction and is not appropriate for council discussion. We move to the next agenda item. Jiwan remained standing, but her microphone was dead. Around the chamber, delegates were already pulling up their data tablets to review the next topic. It was as if she had never spoken at all. As if human lives meant nothing. The next hour brought more of the same. A Velthran delegate proposed new regulations on antimatter production, and buried in the lengthy document was a clause requiring humanity to surrender control of 70% of their antimatter facilities to council oversight, not the facilities of the Velthrans who produced twice as much. Not the Karathi facilities, which had safety violations in 1/3 of their reactors. Just the human ones. When Jiwan questioned this, the Velthran delegate smiled with his triple row of teeth. Humanity should be grateful for this opportunity to serve the greater good. Your species has contributed so little to galactic civilization compared to what you have received. This is merely a small repayment for the privilege of council membership. The privilege of membership. Giwan thought about Captain Minho Choi and his crew, who spent their days patrolling trade routes that primarily benefited other species. She thought about Dr. Suman Beek, who had spent 3 years on Harvest Prime, developing agricultural solutions that would feed billions of aliens while asking for nothing in return. She thought about the hundreds of human engineers, scientists, teachers, and medical personnel scattered across council space, making life better for everyone. She thought about the contributions that humanity had made, the technology they had shared, the wars they had helped fight, the disasters they had helped remedy, and she thought about how in 30 years, not once had the council treated humanity as genuine equals. Every session brought new condescension, new demands, reminders that humans were tolerated but not truly respected. Something inside her reached a breaking point. It was not a sudden explosion of anger, but rather a cold, clear realization. This would never change. The council would never see humanity as equals because they did not want to. They wanted servants who were advanced enough to be useful, but too desperate for acceptance to demand fair treatment. Giwan began collecting her data tablets, placing them carefully in her case. The motion caught the attention of nearby delegates, who watched with curiosity. She secured the case, stood, and smoothed down her suit jacket. Ambassador Park. The session is not yet concluded, Horlick said, his gaseous form swirling with what might have been irritation. Juan looked up at the chair, then let her gaze sweep across the entire assembly. Hundreds of eyes, sensors, and various optical organs focused on her. The hall fell quiet. She took a slow breath and spoke clearly. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The silence held for exactly 3 seconds. Then the hall erupted. Delegates jumped to their feet, shouting questions and protests. Warlick's form turned bright red as he demanded order. Counselor Vex was yelling something about contracts and obligations. The noise built into a chaotic roar. Ji-won picked up her case and walked toward the exit. Her 2 assistants, Hyeon Kim and Ji-ho Lee, quickly gathered their materials and followed. The guards at the door, uncertain what to do, stepped aside and let them pass. Behind them, the assembly descended into arguments. Some delegates insisted this was merely a negotiating tactic, a theatrical gesture meant to gain leverage for better terms. Others demanded sanctions, penalties, forced compliance. A few of the smaller species who had supported human proposals sat quietly, wondering what this would mean for them. None of them truly understood yet. They thought humans were bluffing, or that they would return within days, apologetic and ready to accept whatever terms the council offered. They had spent 30 years treating humanity as desperate for acceptance, as a young species that needed the council more than the council needed them. They were about to learn how wrong they had. Binjuan walked through the station corridors toward the docking bay, where the human transport waited. Her expression remained calm, but inside, she felt something she had not experienced in years of diplomatic service. Not anger, not satisfaction, but simple relief. The pretending was over. The compromising and the patience and the careful political maneuvering had ended. Humanity was done begging for respect. From this moment forward, they would demand it, or they would walk away. And they had just walked away from the entire galaxy. The message reached every human outpost, station, ship, and colony within 12 hours of Ambassador Giwan Park's declaration. It was simple and direct. All human personnel were to cease operations with council entities and return to human-controlled space immediately. No exceptions. No delays. Captain Minho Choi stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Indomitable when the order came through. He read it twice, then looked up at his crew. They were stationed at the edge of the Velthrim border, where they had spent the last 18 months protecting trade convoys from raiders and pirates. Good work that had saved countless lives, both human and alien. Well, he said quietly, "You heard the order. Set course for home." His navigation officer, Lieutenant Ari Kwan, input the coordinates without hesitation. Around them, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the ship for departure. They had questions, certainly, but they were military personnel. Orders were orders. The Velthrin station commander appeared on the communication screen within minutes, his scaled face showing confusion. "Captain Choi, we have received no notification of a patrol rotation." "Where are you going?" Ho Minho replied simply. "But your contract specifies another 6 months of service. We have trade convoys scheduled for next week that require escort through the danger zone. Your presence is required." Minho looked at the Velthrin commander steadily. They had worked together for over a year. The relationship had been professional, if not exactly warm. The Velthrins had always made it clear they considered human military tactics adequate but unsophisticated. "We're done," Minho said. "Find someone else." He cut the communication before the commander could respond. The Indomitable turned away from the border and jumped to faster-than-light travel. leaving the Velthrin station behind. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out thousands of times. Human engineers packed their tools and left construction sites half-finished. Human teachers gathered their students for final goodbyes and departed educational facilities. Human doctors handed over patient files and walked away from hospitals and clinics. Human traders closed their shops, human technicians powered down their equipment, and human diplomats submitted formal letters of resignation. The exodus happened so quickly that most council species barely had time to process what was occurring. On the massive orbital platform known as Commerce Central, the departure of human merchants left entire sections of the marketplace empty. Species who had relied on human imported goods found themselves staring at shuttered storefronts and abandoned warehouses. Technician Hyen Kim worked with a team of 12 other engineers maintaining the council's faster-than-light communication network. The network connected thousands of worlds, allowing instant communication across vast distances. It was the backbone of council civilization, enabling trade, governance, and social connection across the galaxy. The human team had been maintaining 70% of the network nodes. When the order came to leave, Hyen gathered his tools and prepared to shut down his workstation. His supervisor, a crystalline being named Trell, floated into the room with obvious distress.
"Oh, you cannot leave."
Trell said, his internal structure flickering with agitation. The communication grid requires constant maintenance. Without your team, entire sectors will lose connectivity within days. Hyen continued packing. Then you should have treated us better when you had the chance. I have always treated you with professional courtesy, Trell protested. You called human engineering methods crude and inefficient last month, Hyen said calmly. You told me our techniques were acceptable only because proper engineers were too expensive. You reduced our pay twice, while increasing quotas. And when I filed complaints, you dismissed them without review. Trell's crystalline form dimmed. That was merely honest professional assessment. Surely you do not take such feedback personally. Hyen picked up his case and looked at his former supervisor. We're done taking anything from you. Good luck maintaining the network yourself. He walked out. Behind him, Trell began desperately trying to access the maintenance protocols, only to discover that the systems were far more complex than he had ever bothered to learn. The humans had made it look easy. That was not the same as it actually being easy. On the agricultural world of Harvest Prime, Dr. Suman Beek supervised the evacuation of the human research team. They had spent 3 years developing treatments for a fungal infection that threatened the planet's primary food crop. The work had been difficult, requiring countless hours of research and experimentation, but they had succeeded, creating a compound that kept the fungus at bay. The planetary governor met Sumin at the spaceport, 6 arms gesturing frantically. You cannot abandon us now. The treatment requires monthly applications. Without your team, without the compound, the fungus will return. Yes, it will, Sumin agreed. Watching as her team loaded equipment onto the transport ship, billions will starve, the governor said desperately. Sumin turned to face him. Then perhaps you should not have cut our research funding 3 times while spending millions on decorative monuments to your own governance. Perhaps you should not have refused our requests for proper laboratory equipment, because human science was not worth the investment. Perhaps you should have learned how to produce the compound yourself, instead of assuming we would always be here to do it for you. The governor's skin flushed with emotion. We can negotiate. Name your price. There is no price, Suman said quietly. We are going home. What you do next is your problem, not ours. She boarded the transport and never looked back. In council chambers, emergency sessions convened almost immediately. The initial reaction was anger and indignation. How dare humans abandon their responsibilities? Who did they think they were? Demands were drafted for humanity to return immediately and face consequences for breach of contract. But as hours turned into days, anger began mixing with concern. Reports flooded in from across council space. Communication networks were failing. Medical facilities were losing critical staff. Agricultural programs were collapsing. Trade routes were becoming dangerous without human patrol ships. Engineering projects were grinding to a halt. Counselor Vex called for sanctions against humanity. They must be taught that they cannot simply walk away from their obligations to galactic society. A delegate from the Centauran Federation stood up, his expression grim. What obligations? We paid humans barely minimum wages for work that others refused to do. We mocked their contributions while relying on them daily. We dismissed their proposals and ignored their concerns. They owed us nothing, and we treated them as if they should be grateful for that nothing. The assembly erupted in arguments. Some agreed with the Centauran. Others insisted that humanity's departure was childish and irresponsible. But beneath all the arguing, a new emotion was beginning to emerge. Fear. 3 weeks after the exodus began, Centauran Federation's faster-than-light communication network collapsed completely. 36 star systems went dark, unable to contact each other or the central government. The Centaurans had ignored human warnings about maintenance requirements. Assuming their own engineers could handle any problems, they could not. The Kryn pirates, who had carefully avoided human patrol routes, began raiding Council shipping lanes with unprecedented aggression. Without human military vessels to deter them, the pirates operated freely. Ships disappeared. Colonies were attacked. Trade ground to a halt as merchants refused to risk the dangerous routes. On the medical station orbiting Althora Prime, a virologist named Doyen Han had been 3 months away from completing a vaccine for the Vermilion Plague. The disease had been dormant for decades, but had recently resurged, killing thousands. Doyen's research was the galaxy's best hope for stopping it. He received the evacuation order and left his research behind. The Altheric scientists begged him to stay, offering money and honors and promises. He declined politely and boarded the last human transport leaving the system. Without him, the research stalled. The Altheric scientists could not understand his notes or replicate his procedures. The death toll continued to climb back on Earth. Ambassador Jiwan watched reports of the chaos spreading across Council space. She felt no satisfaction, only a quiet sadness that it had come to this. Humanity had wanted partnership and respect. The Council had offered condescension and exploitation instead. Now the Council was learning a painful lesson. Humanity had never needed them. The Council had needed humanity, and that need was becoming more obvious with every passing day. 3 months had passed since humanity closed its borders and withdrew from galactic society. What had started as isolated incidents of system failures and service disruptions had grown into a crisis that threatened the stability of the entire Galactic Council. The Kryn pirates had always been a problem, but a manageable one. They operated from hidden bases in asteroid fields and dead systems, raiding the occasional merchant ship or isolated outpost. For years they had carefully avoided certain areas of space. Areas patrolled by human military vessels, Captain Minnow, Choi, and ships like the Indomitable had maintained regular patrol routes along major trade corridors. The humans had developed a reputation among the pirates as being relentless. Attack a human convoy, and they would hunt you across 3 star systems until they found your base and destroyed it. The Kryn had learned to respect human determination and avoid their territory. Now, the humans were gone, and the Kryn were no longer afraid. Their raids increased tenfold in the first month alone. They hit convoys that had traveled safely for decades. They attacked stations that had never needed defensive shields before. And because the Council had relied so heavily on human patrols, there were massive gaps in coverage that would take years to fill with ships from other species. The Velthrin, Concordat faced the worst of it. Their border worlds had been protected by a network of defense satellites and early warning systems, all designed and maintained by human technicians. Lead technician Jiho Lee had spent 8 years working on those systems, training local personnel and keeping everything running smoothly. The Velthrins had never actually learned how the systems worked. They had always assumed Jiho and his team would be there to handle any problems. They treated the humans as expensive but necessary maintenance workers, not as the highly skilled engineers they actually were. When Jiho left, he offered to provide documentation and training for Velthrin personnel to take over. The Velthrin military command had declined. insisting their own engineers were perfectly capable of understanding human technology. It was, after all, relatively simple compared to advanced Velthran designs. The first defense satellite failed after 6 weeks. The Velthran engineers tried to repair it using standard protocols. Instead, they triggered a cascade failure that took down 3 more satellites. They attempted to reverse engineer the system from the remaining functional units. This caused 2 more failures. Within 2 months, the entire network was compromised. 3 colony worlds sat exposed, with no early warning of approaching threats. When a Kryn raiding fleet attacked the mining colony on Velthran 7, the inhabitants had less than an hour of warning. 2,000 colonists died before military ships could respond. The Velthran Council demanded that the Galactic Council force humanity to return and fix their defense network. The Galactic Council sent formal requests to Earth. The requests were acknowledged and filed away without response. Humanity was not interested in negotiation. On Harvest Prime, the situation was turning desperate. Dr. Sumin Beek's antifungal compound had kept their crops healthy for 3 years. The treatment required monthly application during growing season. The humans had left detailed instructions for producing the compound. Along with samples and equipment, the planetary government had decided to save money by using a simplified version of the production process. They assumed the complex steps were unnecessary over-engineering by overly cautious humans. They were wrong. The simplified compound was only 60% as effective. By the 2nd month, farmers noticed the fungus returning. By the 3rd month, it was spreading faster than the weakened treatment could control it. The government attempted to replicate the original human formula, but they had stripped out equipment and chemicals deemed too expensive. Entire harvests began failing. The planet's food reserves would last perhaps 6 months. After that, 8 billion people would face starvation. The governor, who had dismissed Suman's warnings about proper procedures, was removed from office. His replacement sent desperate pleas to Earth, offering anything for the return of human. Agricultural experts, those pleas joined hundreds of others in Earth's diplomatic archives. All acknowledged. None answered. The medical crisis on Althora Prime had become a catastrophe. The Vermilion Plague was spreading rapidly through the population. Without Doyen Han's vaccine research, the Altheric medical establishment was helpless. They tried to continue his work, but virology was not simply about following instructions. It required intuition, experience, and a deep understanding of complex biological systems. Doyen had that expertise. The Altheric researchers did not in this particular field. They made mistakes, contaminated samples, followed dead ends. Every day of delay meant more deaths. The plague had now killed over 2 million Altherics, with no end in sight. Counselor Vex, who had so publicly mocked human emotional reasoning and primitive thinking, found himself facing angry crowds outside his residence. The same people who had laughed at his jokes about human inferiority were now demanding to know why he had driven away the only scientists capable of saving them. Vex gave speeches about Altheric pride and self-reliance. He insisted their own researchers would develop a vaccine without needing human help. But as the death toll climbed and the plague spread to neighboring systems, his support evaporated. Within a month of the crisis, his own government removed him from his position. The official statement cited failure of leadership and diplomatic incompetence. In the Centauran Federation, the communication blackout had created chaos. Without faster-than-light communication, the government could not coordinate with colony worlds. Each system was essentially operating independently, making local decisions without central guidance. Trade agreements fell apart. Defense coordination became impossible. The carefully managed Federation was fracturing into isolated, frightened systems. The Centaurans had always prided themselves on their advanced technology and sophisticated civilization. They had considered human engineering adequate, but unremarkable, nothing special compared to their own capabilities. Now, their own engineers stared at the inert communication nodes and admitted they simply did not understand how to repair them. The technology was not more advanced than Centauran systems. It was just different, built on principles and approaches that human engineers had developed independently. Without understanding those principles, the Centaurans could not fix what was broken. They could only watch as their civilization slowly disconnected from itself. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council became daily events. Representatives from affected species demanded action. Some still called for sanctions and military intervention against humanity. Others were beginning to advocate for apology and reconciliation. The arguments grew heated and sometimes violent. A delegate from the Korathai Republic stood before the assembly and spoke plainly. "We are suffering these consequences because we treated humanity with contempt while depending on their labor. We paid them poorly, dismissed their expertise, ignored their needs, and assumed they were too grateful for membership to ever leave. We were fools." Councillor Vex's replacement from the Altheric Empire rose to speak. Her voice was heavy with grief. "My predecessor mocked humans as primitive and emotional. Those humans we called primitive are now the only ones capable of stopping a plague that has killed millions of my people. Perhaps we should have spent less time feeling superior and more time treating our supposed inferiors as the equals they always were. But pride and institutional inertia are powerful forces." Many council members still insisted that humanity would return eventually. They were just making a point, playing a political game. No species could truly isolate itself from galactic civilization. The humans would realize their mistake and come back, probably asking for forgiveness. These delegates did not understand humanity very well. On Earth? In the diplomatic headquarters in Geneva, Ambassador Jiwan met with her staff to review the situation. Reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of steadily worsening conditions. Famines, plagues, system failures, and pirate raids were becoming the new normal for council space. Her assistant, Ayin Kim, asked the question they were all thinking. "How long do we wait?" Giwan looked out the window at the city below. "Until they understand. Not just acknowledge, but truly understand what they threw away. Until they recognize that respect cannot be demanded from those you treat with contempt." She turned back to her team. "We are not punishing them. We are simply no longer accepting their treatment of us. When they are ready to treat humanity as genuine equals, we can talk. Until then, we focus on our own people and our own future." The galaxy was learning a hard lesson. Humanity had not needed the Council's approval or validation. The Council had needed humanity's skills, dedication, and willingness to serve. That willingness had ended the moment Jiwan walked out of the assembly hall, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal, the Galactic Council made a catastrophic decision. Faced with mounting crises and growing unrest among member species, they chose to interpret humanity's silence as weakness rather than resolve. If humans would not respond to requests and pleas, perhaps they would respond to force. A fleet of 20 council warships assembled at the edge of human space. Near the colony system of New Sejong, the fleet commander was a Velthran admiral named Cortax. He was chosen because his species had lost the most from humanity's departure. He carried with him an ultimatum from the council. Humanity would return to the negotiating table and resume their duties, or face economic sanctions, trade embargoes, and potential military action. What Cortax and the council did not know was that humanity had not spent 6 months sitting idle. While the galaxy descended into chaos, human engineers, scientists, and military researchers had been working around the clock on projects they had kept secret during their council membership. Technologies they had never shared because they had learned early not to give away their advantages. Admiral Taiyang Nam commanded the human defense fleet protecting New Sejong. His force consisted of 12 ships, outnumbered nearly 2-1. When the council fleet arrived and broadcast their demands, Tai Yang listened patiently to the entire ultimatum before responding. "You have entered human space without permission," he said calmly. "You have 1 hour to leave before we consider your presence an act of war." Cortax's response was dismissive. "Admiral Nam, we have no desire for conflict, but the Council has been more than patient with human stubbornness. Your species has responsibilities to the galactic community. Those responsibilities cannot be abandoned on a whim." "We abandoned nothing," Taiyang replied. "We simply stopped allowing ourselves to be exploited." Your hour has begun. The Council ships did not leave. They had superior numbers and assumed technological parity with human vessels. The Velthrons especially believed their ships were superior to human designs. They had, after all, been spacefaring for thousands of years, longer than humanity. 50-8 minutes later, Tyon gave the order to engage. The battle was short, brutal, and completely one-sided. The human ships had been retrofitted with weapon systems developed from research that had begun 15 years earlier. Directed energy weapons with efficiency ratings 60% higher than anything in Council space. Missile systems with autonomous targeting that could not be jammed or fooled by countermeasures. Point defense systems that made traditional projectile weapons nearly useless. The Council fleet managed to fire exactly 3 volleys before being forced into full defensive postures. Their shields collapsed under focused energy bursts they had no counter for. Their weapons were intercepted by point defense networks that did not miss. Their communications were disrupted by electronic warfare systems that made coordination impossible. Cortax watched in horror as his flagship's shields failed and half his weapon systems went offline. 2 other ships were completely disabled within minutes. The rest of his fleet was faring no better. HFY broadcast an immediate retreat order, but 3 ships never received it because their communication systems had been surgically destroyed. The human fleet stopped firing the moment Council ships began their retreat. They did not pursue. They did not destroy the disabled vessels. They simply escorted the battered fleet to the edge of human space and waited until they jumped away. Cortax returned to Council space with 3 ships destroyed, 7 badly damaged, and his own flagship barely functional. The entire engagement had lasted 11 minutes. The human fleet had suffered 0 casualties and minimal damage to their shields. The news of the defeat spread across the galaxy within hours. The Council had tried to threaten humanity with military force and had been humiliated. More importantly, they had revealed that they had completely underestimated human military capabilities. If humanity had been holding back technology this advanced, what else did they have that they had never shared? The defeat shattered the last illusions that many Council members had been clinging to. Humanity was not coming back because they could be forced or threatened. They were not coming back because they did not need the Council. Perhaps they never had. Individual species began breaking ranks. The Centauran Federation sent a secret delegation to Earth, bypassing the Council entirely. They arrived with a formal apology from their government and a proposal for bilateral relations. Not Council-mediated agreements, but direct treaties between the Centauran Federation and humanity. Ambassador Juan met with them in a conference room overlooking Lake Geneva. The Centauran lead negotiator was a dignified elder named Relax, who had opposed the dismissive treatment of humanity from the beginning. "We come to acknowledge our mistakes," Relax said simply. "The Centauran Federation treated your people poorly. We relied on your expertise while dismissing your value. We ask for forgiveness and the opportunity to establish new relations based on mutual respect." Guan studied the delegation carefully. "And if we refuse? Then we suffer the consequences of our own failings," Relax replied. "We do not come with threats or demands. We come with genuine regret and hope for a better relationship." The sincerity was evident. Unlike the Council's ultimatums and veiled threats, the Centaurans were offering actual respect. Guan took their proposal to the human government for consideration. Within a week, negotiations began in earnest. News of the Centauran human talks sent shockwaves through Council space. If humanity was willing to negotiate with individual species, the Council's authority was effectively broken. Other species rushed to follow the Centauran example. Engineer Bora Shin found herself suddenly in high demand. She had worked on infrastructure projects across Council space before the withdrawal, earning a reputation for solving impossible problems. Now 6 different species were contacting her directly, offering substantial payments for her services. Bora negotiated carefully, establishing contracts on human terms. Fair pay for fair work. Genuine authority over project decisions. Respect for human methods and expertise. The right to walk away if those terms were violated. and every contract included a clause that human personnel could veto any policy that affected their working conditions. Species signed eagerly. The terms were generous compared to what humans had received as council members, but fair compared to what they paid their own top specialists. More importantly, the alternative was continuing to suffer from system failures and infrastructure collapse. The Korathi Republic hired a team of human medical researchers to help combat a respiratory illness affecting their population. The Silicate Collective contracted human engineers to repair their mining operations. The Parlax Dominion requested human agricultural specialists to improve crop yields on their colony worlds. Each successful contract demonstrated something the Council had never wanted to admit. Humans were not just adequate workers, grateful for the opportunity to serve. They were highly skilled professionals whose expertise was valuable enough that species would pay premium prices and accept human terms to access it. Within 3 months of the Council fleet's defeat, 40% of Council member species had established some form of direct contact with humanity. Some sought trade agreements. Others wanted technical assistance. A few simply wanted to apologize and explore friendship without the Council's involvement. The Council. Leadership watched helplessly as their authority disintegrated. They called emergency sessions and passed resolutions demanding that member species cease unauthorized contact with humanity. The resolutions were ignored. The Council had no enforcement mechanism that did not rely on member species choosing to obey, and those species had decided that survival was more important than Council rules. The Altheric Empire, devastated by the Vermilion Plague, sent a delegation led by their new chief counselor. She stood before the human diplomatic corps and did something unprecedented in Altheric history. She apologized. "We allowed arrogance to blind us to reality," she said, her voice carrying the weight of millions of deaths. "Our people die while the cure exists in the mind of a researcher. We drove away with our contempt. I cannot undo that mistake. But I can acknowledge it and beg for your help." The apology was genuine, born from desperate tragedy. The human government consulted with Doyen Han, who had the authority to make his own choice. After 2 days of consideration, he agreed to return to Althra Prime, but only under strict conditions. Full authority over research, complete autonomy for his team, substantial funding, and a formal, public acknowledgement from the Altheric government that they had been wrong to dismiss human expertise. The Altherics agreed to every condition. Doyen returned and resumed his work. Within 6 weeks, he completed the vaccine. The plague was stopped, though not before claiming over 4 million lives. A tragedy that could have been prevented if the Altherics had treated humans with respect from the beginning. The galaxy was fracturing along new lines. Species that had recognized their mistakes and approached humanity with genuine respect were forming new alliances and partnerships. Those that clung to pride and insisted humanity should be grateful for Council membership were left to struggle alone with problems they could not solve. The old order was dying. Something new was being born, and humanity stood at the center of it, no longer begging for acceptance, but offering partnership to those willing to meet them as equals. 1 year after, Ambassador Giwan Park walked out of the Council Assembly Hall. The galaxy looked completely different. The Galactic Council still existed technically, but it was a shadow of its former self. The Grand Assembly Hall that once hosted hundreds of species now held scattered delegations arguing over the remnants of their authority. More than half the Council's former members had withdrawn or established independent agreements with humanity. They had not done so out of spite or rebellion, but simple necessity. The Council could not provide what they needed. Humanity could. If approached with respect, Earth's diplomatic headquarters had expanded significantly to handle the flood of requests, negotiations, and treaty discussions. But humanity had no interest in simply replacing the Council as another central authority. They had learned from watching the Council's failures. Instead, Ambassador Giwan proposed something different. The Free Trade Concordat, an alliance based on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. No central authority demanding compliance. No hierarchical structure, placing some species above others, just equals working together because cooperation served everyone's interests. The first official meeting of the Concordat took place on a newly constructed station, neutral space. Built through a joint effort of human and Centauran engineers, the station was named Unity, though humans privately joked that irony might have been more appropriate given the Council's history. 43 species attended that first meeting. The room was designed without a raised platform or central seat of authority. Instead, delegations sat in a circle, each with equal position and equal voice. G1 served as facilitator, but she held no more power than any other representative. The Concordat's founding principles were simple: voluntary membership based on mutual respect, fair trade without exploitation, cooperative security without mandatory military obligations, shared knowledge without forced technology transfer, and most importantly, any member could leave at any time without penalty or sanction. It was everything that Galactic Council had claimed to be, but never was. The transformation of galactic society happened gradually, but inevitably. Species that joined the Concordat found that treating partners with respect produced better results than demanding obedience. Trade flourished because it was genuinely, mutually beneficial. Technical cooperation advanced faster because experts were not resentful of their treatment. Security improved because forces defending shared interests fought harder than those fulfilling mandatory obligations. The old council members who had refused to adapt watched enviously as prosperity and stability returned to Concordat space while their own problems multiplied. Some clung to pride, insisting that the council's traditional methods were correct and that others would eventually return. They were wrong. The breaking point for the old council came when the Velt